The anime begins with Haruka, our edgelord, crouched behind a tree witnessing your family reunion, only to blow his cover by stepping on the smallest twig that is smaller than your peen. The goblin spotted him and gave chase, but Haruka smirked, confident in his abilities. As he leaped into the air, the goblins all stumbled into the trap he'd set. Pleased with himself, Haruka silently congratulated himself for surviving solo in another world. The scene shifts to the past, explaining how Haruka ended up in this situation. Born a natural loner, he never wanted anything to do with his classmates, finding them annoying and a distraction from what he loved most, reading. Back in his classroom, the social divisions were obvious. Big giant girls, delinquents, jocks, nerds, the class rep, and the rest. However, Haruka didn't belong to any of them, and he liked it that way. One day, a magic circle appeared in the middle of class. Haruka, being a fan of manga, recognized it but also remembered how annoying it would be to get stuck in another world. He hated the idea of being surrounded by people. As panic ensued, he tried to make his escape, cleverly crawling into an air vent. But to his luck, the magic circle expanded, chasing him, and eventually he ended up in the typical white void. Haruka knew the drill from reading so much manga and wondered when the king and his unattainable daughter would show up. Instead, some frantic old guide who looked like a god beckoned him over. It turned out that Haruka's classmates had already been summoned to the new world, and he was the last to be teleported. Before his transfer, Haruka was allowed to pick his stats and skills. A giant menu then popped up with his options, but to his surprise, all the good skills were taken. He was left with useless ones like stick holding, good health, and walking. Browsing through the leftovers, he found titles like Shut-In and NEET, which only made him feel worse. Furious, Haruka demanded better options, but the old god, fed up, decided to dump all the remaining skills on him at once. So Haruka entered the new world with a pool of useless abilities and a bag that could hold an unlimited number of items. Checking his stats, Haruka was told to roll dice. Annoyed, he remembered this obscure skill and reluctantly rolled the dice, getting a double M. Not knowing what it meant, he assumed it stood for masochist, expecting the worst. However, his stat screen prompted him to allocate points, so he dumped everything into luck, thinking raw stats wouldn't help him survive with his lame skills. Then it hit him. M stood for max, and his luck stat was now maxed out. Surprised, Haruka noticed 2 extra skills among the sea of worthless ones. Apparently, because he was summoned alone, he received the loner title, which prevented him from joining any parties. He also gained his servitude skill, allowing him to command others, which was cool, but it meant his dreams of a harem were over. Haruka briefly wondered where his classmates were, but it didn't matter since he couldn't join forces with them anyway. Ready to start his adventure, he focused on finding a base of operations. In the forest, denser than your mom, he worried about encountering monsters. He searched for a useful skill, but only thought of one that allowed him to doze off. While sorting through his items, he tried on some contact lenses, which surprisingly gave him the appraisal skill. This helped him find edible mushrooms that boosted his abilities. With his bottomless bag, he grabbed as many as he could, apologizing to the bag for initially thinking it was useless. After drinking some water, he heard a noise in the distance. Following the sound, he discovered a cave. Praying he wouldn't run into any monsters, Haruka decided to make it his base. With his camping gear and temperature magic, he lit a small fire and realized that his supposedly useless leftover skills were turning out to be more helpful than he thought. Haruka checks his stats again and is surprised to see his temperature magic has leveled up, unlocking fire magic. This could be helpful, but he still worries about how he'll handle a monster if one shows up, since right now his only weapon is a stick. Despite these concerns, he ends up falling asleep without a care. The next morning, Haruka wakes to find everything is fine. His items repel monsters, and his shut-in title creates a protective barrier around his base. Now that he has fire magic, starting a fire is much easier, so he cooks himself some breakfast. He uses the beef jerky from his bag and the mushrooms he found the day before. The meal is surprisingly delicious, and Haruka feels grateful for his villager starter bag, though he thinks it's more of a survivalist's kit. Determined to gather more food, Haruka heads out but knows his top priority is figuring out how to protect himself from monsters. Unfortunately, his worst fear comes true when he encounters 2 goblins. Though they're small fry monsters, their stats are higher than he expected. Haruka doubts he can win but realizes he has no choice. Eventually, he'll have to learn how to fight monsters. His stick seems inadequate, but he remembers he has a skill called wrapping, which lets him enhance objects with magic. This makes his stick stronger, and Haruka becomes determined to survive even without any cheat skills. Haruka launches his first ever attack, taking the first goblin by surprise and brutally beating it down. The second goblin tries to strike, but its moves are clumsy, and Haruka dodges with ease. During the fight, he instinctively taps into a new power and eliminates the second goblin. Afterward, he feels proud of his victory and heads back to his base, bringing one of the goblin's clubs with him. However, after comparing it with his enhanced stick, he decides to stick with what he has. Upon checking his stats, Haruka is thrilled to see that he leveled up and his stats have more than doubled. His cane mastery leveled up as well, which confuses him since all he did was swing the stick a few times. He also gained magic infusion, likely from enchanting his stick, and even his calisthenics skill improved, which he jokingly attributes to his habit of never skipping morning exercises. Later, Haruka gets tired of eating mushrooms and longs for meat, but knows the class rep would scold him for being ungrateful. After finishing his meal, he tries out magic infusion on himself, enhancing his physical and magical defenses. His appraisal skill also levels up, but it's still showing question marks on most of his items, which he finds odd. Deciding not to overthink it, he heads back out. While wandering the forest, Haruka feels blessed to find something, but it's just another mushroom. He's tempted to search for meat other than the one below, but reminds himself to practice his magic instead. His enhanced body now feels so light, it's almost like teleporting, and his dexterity has skyrocketed as well. He encounters a more powerful goblin and defeats it easily, gaining enough confidence to believe he could take on a group of 3. However, when he actually runs into such a group, his cowardice kicks in, and he decides to avoid more fighting for the day. By day 5, Haruka manages to defeat a goblin in a single strike and decorates his base with some fancy creations he made using magic. Pleased with how well this new life is shaping up, Haruka feels a sense of accomplishment. That night, while chasing a meaty rabbit, Haruka senses something unusual. To his dismay, it's his classmates. To make it worse, the ones approaching are the delinquents. Not wanting to get involved, Haruka checks the other direction using his clairvoyant skill and is horrified to see the big giant baddies. The jocks are also nearby, and though the nerds are close too, Haruka would rather not interact with them either. That leaves the class rep and her group. Haruka has known the class rep since grade school, and though it would be smart to make allies in this dangerous world, he stops himself. But in this moment of reflection, Haruka realizes how free and independent he feels, living on his own terms without anyone interfering. He values this newfound freedom more than anything and makes his final decision. They'll conquer this world alone without relying on anyone else, fitting for our true edgelord. While celebrating his loner status, Haruka got a little too carried away, making enough noise to catch the attention of the nearby delinquents. Panicking at the thought of being discovered and possibly getting backshots, he quickly dove into the bushes to hide. One of the smug delinquents, however, sensed something was off and began walking towards the bushes to investigate. Luckily for Haruka, a rabbit hopped by and distracted them, causing the delinquents to lose interest and walk away. Relieved, Haruka decided to follow them from a distance. The delinquents eventually gathered by a riverbank, casually chatting about typical guy stuff. Haruka was disgusted by their behavior, feeling grateful that the class rep was too sensible to ever be interested in guys like them. Suddenly, he noticed the delinquents had grabbed a nerdy classmate named Tanaka, treating him like a walking encyclopedia for answers about their abilities. After a while, they headed upstream to find the other classmates, but Haruka had no interest in joining them, so he returned to his cave and began cooking mushrooms. While checking his stats, he noticed his loner skill had leveled up, likely because he'd stayed away from the others. Despite this, he was still stuck at level 3, probably due to his Master of None skill, which made him good at everything but unable to focus on improving a single skill. Another skill, Blockhead, puzzled him as it seemed more like an insult than a useful ability. Trying to ease his worries, Haruka resorted to stress eating and went to sleep. Later that night, he was jolted awake by KSI's new song. Expecting to find the delinquents again, he was surprised to see the nerds engaged in an all-out battle with goblins. Their fighting skills, however, were about as effective as my 5 feet under grandmother's skills, which made Haruka chuckle. He considered whether to help, but when he checked their stats, he was shocked. The nerds had powerful cheat skills and were way higher level than him. He remembered that his class was filled with top-tier students, whether athletes, geniuses, or children of celebrities, making him the only average guy. Deciding the nerds could handle themselves, he headed back to sleep. But just as he was about to settle in, he sensed something nearby. Turning around, Haruka saw 2 goblins sneaking up on the nerds, ready to give them backshots. Feeling bad for them, Haruka decided to intervene. With a single swing of his big black thick staff, he knocked the goblins out, surprising the nerds who hadn't expected to see him there. They thanked him and followed him back to his cave. Upon seeing the beautiful, well-organized cave, the nerds were astonished. It was spotless, filled with useful items, and shockingly clean. They asked how he managed to set up such an impressive space. But Haruka simply replied that his earth magic and a few low-tier magic skills helped him out. Curious, Haruka then asked what happened to the rest of the class. The mood shifted, and one of the nerds, glasses fogged up, looked down before explaining. He revealed that when the class had first been transported to this strange world, everyone was in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. But the nerds quickly figured things out, realizing they had cheat skills. Meanwhile, the big giant girls were whining, and the class rep was trying her best to calm everyone down. The delinquents, noticing the nerds weren't as scared, threatened them for information about this world. But before they could act, they were ambushed by goblins. Chaos broke out. The big giant girls cried, and even the delinquents scrambled into a corner. But this was the moment every nerd dreams of. The nerds sprang into action, using their knowledge of fantasy worlds to fend off the goblins with ease. The gym bros eventually joined in, and together they defeated all the goblins in the area. The class rep took charge again, leading everyone to a safer spot near the river where they could see approaching danger. The nerds then helped explain the basics of survival, and the class set up camp, with tasks assigned to each group. However, not everyone cooperated. The big giant girls were the first to rebel, deciding they didn't want to participate in setting up camp and leaving on their own. Seeing this, the delinquents followed suit. Despite the class rep's efforts to keep everyone together, the class fractured into smaller groups. The rep, along with the nerds and a handful of other students, tried to hold things together, but the nerds were forced to take on most of the work, from battling goblins to maintaining the camp. The nerds were also focused on raising their levels as quickly as possible to avoid falling under the control of two dangerous skills, both held by the delinquents. These skills could potentially control everyone else, and the only defense was a high level of magic resistance. Unfortunately, the delinquents caught on to this and began leveling up as well, determined to maintain their dominance and keep their skills in power. The nerds soon shared their plan with the class rep, who decided to train and level up as well. After a few days, the delinquents finally mastered the mind control skill and conveniently stumbled upon the class rep while she was walking nearby. Wasting no time, these scumbags tried to use their new skill on her, but the class rep was ready. She stunned them with a taser, leaving them writhing on the ground. The nerds helped carry the delinquents back to camp, where their plot was exposed and they were kicked out of the group. Unfortunately, the nerds' victory wasn't the happy ending they'd hoped for. The delinquents, fueled by rage, turned on their classmates. They burned down the camp and chased after the nerds to exact revenge. The entire camp was destroyed, and no one dared stand up to the delinquents, especially now that they had mind control abilities. This devastated the nerds, who had worked tirelessly to build the camp. To make matters worse, the class began blaming the nerds for everything, saying they shouldn't have provoked the delinquents in the first place. Slowly, everyone turned against them. Only the class rep stood up for them, but the situation had become too awkward. In the end, the nerds decided to leave. Haruka, amazed by what he just heard, hugged the nerds tightly and called them true heroes. To cheer them up, he threw a party where they stuffed themselves with mushrooms. The next morning, as they said their goodbyes, the nerds asked Haruka if he wanted to join their group, since he seemed to fit in well with them. They planned to head to a nearby town to become adventurers, but Haruka turned them down, reminding them that he's a loner. With a casual dismissal, he sent them off like a big brother shooing away younger siblings. Haruka decided to check on his remaining classmates, especially the class rep. On his way, he encountered a rabid wolf, which bit his arm. Despite the injury, he managed to knock the wolf out and kept moving. By nightfall, he reached the area where his classmates had been camped, only to find the remains of their camp. Using his tracking skills, he followed their footprints, but suddenly sensed a group of big giant girls heading straight for him. He tried to slip away, but they spotted him and shouted for him to stop. Haruka bolted, knowing he shouldn't get involved with them, but they caught up and demanded to know where the nerds were. Annoyed, Haruka asked if they just wanted the nerds to do their errands again. The big giant girls told him to shut up, admitting they'd realized their mistake and how the nerds had kept them a lie all this time. They just wanted to apologize. Haruka, unfazed, told them to let it go since the nerds were long gone. He warned that they'd be doomed if they chased after the nerds without knowing how to handle the monsters along the way. To his surprise, the girls started crying out of nowhere, saying they genuinely wanted to apologize. The captain of the big giant girls begged Haruka to teach them how to survive, promising to give him anything he wanted if he helped. Reluctantly, Haruka agreed. The girls followed him like lost puppies, attacking whatever Haruka killed. When one of the girls got injured, Haruka gave her a potion to heal herself, but she, being clueless, thought it was champagne and poured it all over him. Frustrated, Haruka wondered when he'd finally get back to his cave and relax. As he zoned out, the class rep spotted him and called out his name, seeming happy to see him. Haruka was too preoccupied to respond at first, but she finally got his attention by yelling. Startled, Haruka realized the class rep was standing right beside him. He began to wonder if this was finally his chance to get close to her. before the delinquents inevitably attacked again. Back with our edgelord, he is soon startled by the class rep's sudden scream, but she reminds him that they've been friends since grade school. The other girls are also with her, but the class rep is more concerned about what happened to the popular girls. Haruka struggles to explain as he doesn't fully understand how they came under his control. Deciding to be honest, Haruka tells her that the girls have become his servants. This only makes the class rep angrier, pointing out that the domination skill is meant for monsters, not people. However, Haruka insists it was just a mistake, but none of the girls believe him. Feeling cornered, he decides it's time to leave, but they quickly stop him. Haruka, being a loner at heart, just wants to go home alone. Soon, the class rep snaps Shimazaki out of Haruka's spell and turns to her for answers. Haruka doesn't mind since it gives him a chance to slip away, but the class rep tells him to stay as they discuss what happened. Ignoring them, Haruka then begins practicing his home-building abilities, focusing on creating a basement. Things go well at first, but not long after he finds himself accidentally burying himself underground. The class rep helps him out and explains that Shimazaki told her everything. She quickly realizes Haruka was just trying to help, though Haruka has no memory of saying anything like that. The girls thank him for being so kind, but all Haruka wants is to go home. The girls, however, continue pressuring him for help. The class rep asks what he means by home, and Haruka explains he has a place in this new world. The class rep is shocked, thinking he was born here, but Haruka clarifies that he built the house himself. Soon after hearing this, the girls then gather to discuss their plans before asking how many people can fit in Haruka's home. He estimates that it could hold at least 240 people, which equates to the size of your mother. They then ask if they can stay with him for a day, which shocks Haruka. This initially flustered him as some high school girls want to spend the night at his place, but the class rep points out that he's the only pervert around. Soon he leads them to his house. The girls are impressed, especially with the path leading to it. The class rep even jokes about whether he has a convenience store nearby, but Haruka explains he's planning to build a pharmacy first. When they arrive exhausted, Haruka welcomes them in. The girls are amazed at how luxurious his home has become with all the upgrades. Haruka, of course, directs them to the kitchen, but they're more interested in the bath. To his shock, they all undress and jump right into the bath, leaving him to think that living in the forest has turned them insane. However, deep down, our edgelord is secretly pleased to finally have some alone time that only loners can appreciate. The class rep later comes to thank him, explaining that the other boys had abandoned the girls, leaving them worried. But being around Haruka and enjoying the comforts of his home helped calm them. She's upset that she didn't do more for the group, but Haruka assures her that she's done plenty. Sure, she didn't do as much as the nerds, but Haruka points out that those guys never went outside in the old world and have basically been preparing for this situation by playing games their whole lives. The next morning, a girl wakes him up saying breakfast is ready, but Haruka just wants to sleep a little longer. She then asks him to get up for her, which feels a bit too forward, given the situation. But Haruka was quickly left speechless when he discovers the girl has made fish for breakfast. He then takes a bite of the delicious fish and is immediately overwhelmed with emotion, bursting into tears because it's been ages since he's tasted anything so good. The class rep is baffled by his reaction, pointing out that he lives right next to a river, but Haruka explains that despite living near water, he hasn't been able to catch any fish. They're too quick and slippery, so he's been stuck watching them swim while he eats shrooms like a crackhead. One of the girls then demonstrates how she uses lightning magic to stun a whole bunch of fish in the water at once. Haruka, intrigued, asks her to show him again. As she prepares to attack, Haruka uses his packing skill to wrap around the lightning magic. This allows him to manipulate the magic and use it to stun and capture some fish himself. He celebrates his success and even realizes that he has learned the lightning magic skill in the process. However, Haruka isn't exactly sure how it worked, but he explains to the girls that by combining his packing skill with magic, he can acquire the elemental properties of the magic. The class rep is amazed at how overpowered this sounds, but Haruka dismisses it, saying he was stuck with all the worst leftover skills. Even bad skills have their uses, he concludes. The girls are planning to find a nearby town, but they want to level up first. Haruka agrees that leveling up is a good idea, especially if they want to face the nerds again, though the gossip girls clarify that they just want to thank them. When Haruka asks the girls for their current levels, he is shocked to discover they're all over level 16, while he's still only at level 7. He decides to start their training by having them fight some low-level kobolds. Confident, the girls approach the level 3 monsters, but things don't go as planned. They end up knocked out. Haruka is pleased that his magic tent is able to expand, but the girls take advantage of this by gathering inside for a post-battle review. Most leave afterward, but the purple-haired girl from earlier stays behind. She apologizes for her behavior that morning and reveals that she was just testing him. The other boys had done weird things to her before, so she wanted to see if Haruka was the same. She then realizes he's different as he gave them a place to stay, food to eat, and even taught them how to fight. She also plans to wake him up for breakfast the next day, and Haruka bids her goodbye, calling her the fish girl. The following morning, Haruka enjoys his breakfast as he overhears some of the girls planning a rematch with the kobolds. The class rep intervenes, saying they're not ready yet and need more training. After practicing against some goblins, the girls feel more confident and decide to face the kobolds again. Haruka is concerned, and his fears are confirmed when some of the girls are quickly knocked out or start faking illness. He realizes the class rep's training might not be as effective as she thought. Just when things seem hopeless, a few of the girls team up and manage to defeat the kobolds. They celebrate, declaring that they won't lose to them anymore. Haruka is relieved because this means he can finally return to his peaceful loner lifestyle. But his relief is short-lived when the class rep happily announces that they can all travel together to the town. Moments later, as the girls prepare for the journey, Haruka has the purple-haired girl stuff her bag with as much as possible. The class rep comments that they're going overboard, causing Haruka to jokingly suggest leaving the purple-haired girl behind. As the group embarks on their journey, Haruka advises the class rep that anything could happen, but he's optimistic, declaring that they just need to stay sharp. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, another student is running for his life. In his panic, he trips over the tiniest pebble imaginable. The person he was fleeing catches up to him, and the student begs for his life, saying he doesn't have the skills the pursuer wants. But the mysterious figure ignores his pleas and mercilessly makes out with him until he stops breathing. The next day, Haruka leads the group through the forest, alert to the possibility that their bullies might be lurking nearby. As the leader, his priority is the group's safety, and the quickest way to ensure that is to reach the city as soon as possible. But the bullies aren't their only worry. The forest itself holds its own dangers. Suddenly, a massive orc blocks their path. Haruka orders everyone to stand back and carefully assess the situation as he faces the creature. The orc swings its club, narrowly missing, giving Haruka a chance to gauge its speed. According to what they know, this type of orc has high resistance to physical attacks, and magic is the best way to defeat it. With that in mind, Haruka opens his menu, browsing his spells across the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air. Abilities he'd honed in practical ways, even for chores. Despite the threat, Haruka isn't completely on his own. The orc resumes its assault, smashing a tree Haruka had used for cover. As its swings grow dangerously close, Haruka quickly maneuvers behind it and strikes it with a stick, surprising everyone as the orc collapses with a single hit. Haruka grows pensive, having just stated that orcs are resistant to physical attacks, yet he's defeated one with just a stick. The girls gather closer, puzzled by the odd encounter. Even Haruka can't explain it, but promises to use magic next time. Before long, the group encounters another orc, and this time, Haruka tests his fire magic, hurling a fireball to win with ease, once again leaving everyone puzzled by his effortless wins. The girls realize Haruka might be too overpowered for a conventional fight, but by nightfall, they're less frustrated, especially with roasted meat at their improvised campsite. A little further off, Haruka uses earth magic to set up a deep pit trap for security. His magical tents not only repel monsters, but also detect nearby presences, ensuring the group's safety. With the camp secure, he maps out the route for the next day, checking the river's location, when he suddenly senses a presence nearby. Rushing to investigate, he spots some figures, fearing it's the bullies, but instead finds friendly athletes. Suspicious of their intentions, Haruka assumes they're after someone in the forest, but they clarify they're actually looking for him. Meanwhile, the girls don't trust anyone from the class. The athlete's leader, however, warns Haruka of a dangerous skill roaming the forest that's more concerning than hypnosis or mind control, a skill called hijack. Haruka recalls hearing of this skill, and the athlete confirms it, but isn't the delinquents who have it, but rather an outsider. Haruka jokingly taunts the athletes, suggesting he might possess the skill himself. They admit it might be better in his hands than in the bullies and ask if he knows how to use it. Embarrassed, Haruka admits he only has the magic of servitude, a concept the athletes aren't familiar with but trust he won't use recklessly. A bit annoyed, Haruka warns them not to underestimate loners. They insist they mean no harm and just wanted to warn him about hijack while monitoring the bullies. Finally, they ask Haruka to pass along their apologies to the girls for past incidents, then take their leave. The next morning, Haruka gathers the team to resume their journey, and he notices the girls seem unusually upbeat, leaving him curious. As he steps aside, the class representative approaches, wanting to discuss his encounter with Kakizaki's group. Haruka mentions their apology, but she has something more serious to say. She reveals she's the one with the hijack skill, surprised Haruka hadn't figured it out sooner. She admits she'd asked Oda's group to keep her hijack skill a secret. Now that Haruka knows, she wonders why he chose to help her despite the skill's deadly nature, one that lets her steal someone's abilities by taking their life. Haruka, unfazed, responds lightly. She explains that hijack is considered the most terrifying and sinister ability. Haruka remarks that even the group of nerds who had sealed away other dangerous skills hadn't touched hers, believing only she should wield it. Touched, the class rep tears up, playfully blaming Haruka for making her cry, and he jokingly dashes off, though she's grateful for his support. Later, the group continues toward the river. Once they reach the spot Haruka had planned, he suddenly dashes forward, testing his magic infusion and using his magic weight skill to make himself lighter. This lets him leap high into the air, hopping from branch to branch until he reaches a great height. Despite his efforts, he still hasn't learned to fly, so he crashes down, nearly losing all his HP. He would have died without his magic infusion, but at least he's found the right path, even if it involved briefly playing bird. Shaken, Haruka tries to explain to the class rep why he returned to the escort team all banged up, but his explanation falls flat. At dawn, the group sets off again, this time taking a faster route. Various events unfold along the way. Despite these incidents, the team stays united, pressing toward their goal. Eventually, the storm clears, and they find the forest's exit with the girls cheering. Haruka, however, remains cautious, scanning the hills for any hidden dangers. Checking his menu, he finds he's learned the airwalk skill from his previous leap. He quickly tests it, using it to scan the area for safety. As they proceed, he spots some locals under attack by monsters. Though he hesitates, uncertain if the strangers are trustworthy, the girls insist on helping. The class rep even promises to fight if they turn out to be bandits. Knowing how she'd react, Haruka decides to handle it alone to avoid risking his companions. To reach the struggling group quickly, he uses the wind tornado spell he tried the previous day. Unfortunately, the tornado pulls the class rep along with him as she grabs his cloak to keep from falling. They realize too late that they can't stop as planned and crash near the group's carriage like a meteor. After the dust settles, Haruka has already dealt with the nearby monsters, and the class rep steadies herself. The group's leader, a black-haired man named Ofter, introduces himself as another man. Gatek joins him. Haruka asks about the attack, and Ofter explains that a pack of great green wolves ambushed their merchant caravan and the guild placed a bounty on them. Their team tried to take the job, but underestimated the wolves' strength. Afterward, Haruka grills a mushroom for Gatek, who excitedly identifies it as a buff shroom, a rare mushroom that grants a temporary power boost. Surprised, Haruka shares it, helping the girls quickly recover. Watching the group interact, he feels oddly at ease around the newcomers. Soon, the rest of the group catches up to Haruka, and the girls are thrilled to meet an elf for the first time. The locals guide them to the long-awaited city. To mark the moment, the group draws a line in the dirt as a symbol of their new chapter and leaps over it, facing their future together. Meanwhile, the bullies train and level up deeper in the forest, determined to find the girls for a showdown. One boy, recently captured, suggests breaking the seal on their puppet and hypnosis skills, but they'll need someone with a sealing ability, meaning they must track down the group of nerds with that skill before seeking revenge. But unbeknownst to them, the athletes watch their distant enemies warily, realizing no good will come from any interaction with them. They decide to return to the city, where the group marvels at its beauty and vibrant life, the realization sinking in that they truly are in another world. Everyone seems thrilled, except for Haruka, who feels out of place in this lively environment. The girls are particularly fascinated by the unique shops, full of items they've never seen before. Amid the excitement, the class representative reminds everyone there's an important task they need to complete, rushing off to get it done. Haruka, meanwhile, feels a bit of relief knowing he has brought everyone here safely, thinking his mission is complete. Elsewhere in the city, two girls giggle at the sight of buildings resembling cupcakes, joking about eating them. The class rep playfully cautions them that stones don't make for good snacks. She struggles to manage everyone's enthusiasm and asks Haruka for help, only to find him relaxing in the shade with a drink. Frustrated, she scolds him, acknowledging he completed his mission but reminding him that they're in unfamiliar territory. She then blows a whistle, calling the girls to attention, and announces the next steps. First, they need to visit the Adventurers Guild to sell the items they gather and register as adventurers. Then they'll need to find a place to stay for the night, and tomorrow they can inquire about Oda's group. However, the leader of the big Gyak baddies questions why Oda's group is a lower priority. Caught off guard, the representative explains she didn't mean it that way. Haruka takes the opportunity to tease Shimazaki about being concerned for the nerds, which she awkwardly denies. Eventually, they make it to the guild, and Haruka feels a sense of foreboding just from the building's exterior. Inside, rough-looking characters stare at them as a guild member approaches Haruka, telling him the guild master wants to meet him. Nervous, Haruka asks the others to handle registration while he faces the master. To his surprise, the guild master, an intimidating figure, thanks Haruka for rescuing another group, easing his fears. After he calms down, Haruka finds the counter where he can sell his magic stones. He unloads dozens of stones, but the staff member warns that calculating their worth will take time, and he'll need to wait until tomorrow. On the other hand, the girls finish their registration, surprising both Ofter and Gatek with their levels, as many are already above level 30. Shimazaki encourages Haruka to register too, making him feel for the first time that he belongs in an official group here. Inspired by his friend's excitement, the class rep tells Ofter and Gatek that Haruka will be a great adventurer since he brought them safely to the city. Haruka then begins his registration but discovers he needs to be at least level 10. As he's only level 9, he drops to his knees in frustration, pleading for an exception. The staff member declines, adding that to go solo, he'd need to be level 20, and only at level 30 will he be fully recognized as an adventurer. Frustrated, Haruka realizes level 20 is a long way off, and due to his loner ability, he can't join any group. The representative, seeing Haruka's disappointment, takes charge of finding lodging for everyone. By evening, she leads the group to a hotel recommended by the guild, but Haruka finds the heart-shaped decor a bit odd. A young receptionist greets them, and while Haruka wonders if this is a love hotel, the representative brushes off his concerns. As night falls, Haruka reluctantly admits that the room is comfortable, though he misses the forest. Shimazaki quietly ponders where Oda and the other boys might be. Morning arrives on the 19th day since their arrival, and over breakfast, the representative announces that the city is safe and full of interesting shops. Seeing the girls' happiness, Haruka realizes they'll thrive here. When he returns to the guild, the staff member hands him a bag of money, explaining they can't pay the full amount for all of his stones at once and will make installments. The guild master sets aside 8 million heals as the first payment, which Haruka calculates is equivalent to around $52,000 in Japan. With their funds ready, the representative declares it's time to buy essentials. Gatek suggests a store specializing in dungeon items. At the shop, they find a variety of curious items, the owner eccentric but welcoming as their adventure in this new world continues. Haruka eagerly tests various items, starting with the invisibility cloak, power gloves, fire staff, and mana-cutting sword, instantly fascinated by each one. He becomes especially enamored of the necklace called 7 Shops, which the shopkeeper explains can combine the effects of up to 7 other items. Just as he's about to try the mistletoe twig, a tool that enhances magical staffs, the class rep shows up, reminding him it's time to head back to the hotel. Frustrated, Haruka grabs the twig, accidentally activating it and fusing all his gear into the necklace without paying. The shopkeeper, furious at the unintended fusion, demands 10 million heals. Despite efforts by the class rep and Gatek to negotiate, they only manage to reduce the price to 8 million. Haruka ends up completely broke, dashing his hopes of buying more items. Moreover, since he's not yet an official adventurer, he can't leave the city to gather magic stones. With limited options, Haruka decides he belongs in the forest, finding comfort in his invisibility cloak, which is now fused with his simple peasant gear. Using the cloak, Haruka sneaks past his classmates and heads toward the city wall. Just as he's about to make his escape, a few classmates spot him, causing him to crash awkwardly into the wall. His first attempt at escape ends in failure, but he isn't ready to give up. The next day, while the girls prepare for their first mission, Haruka requests to join them but is quickly dismissed by the class rep due to his recent escape attempt. Once they depart, he uses the invisibility cloak to bypass the guards and finally makes it to the forest. Ecstatic, he races back, ignoring all obstacles, including a group of bandits attacking a defenseless girl in a carriage. When the bandits turn on him, Haruka is forced to fight back, summoning a fire bullet to dispatch them. Afterward, he notices his wooden staff is transformed into a cane, likely thanks to the twig or the fire staff he fused earlier. When the bandits recover, they realize Haruka is just a level 9, so they use weapon skills like slash, double, and dash, techniques typically reserved for those above level 20. However, their lack of skill leaves them to exhaust themselves, allowing Haruka to win without much effort. Afterward, the girl in the carriage, who introduces herself as Mariel, a noble with an eccentric personality, thanks him for his help. She reveals that she's the daughter of a local lord and insists that he accompany her the rest of the way for protection, offering a reward as thanks. Although Haruka is set on returning to the forest, her promise of gratitude sways him to accept. As they travel, Mariel asks which city Haruka came from, and he describes it as an unpleasant place with strict rules, especially the Adventurers Guild, which he criticizes openly. Mariel's eyes fill with tears, revealing that she's the daughter of the very lord he insulted, and that their carriage is headed back to that same city. Panicked, Haruka tries to exit, but Mariel insists he deserves a reward for his heroic act. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the athletes and bullies clash in a fierce battle, and the leader of the athletes suffers a grave injury when pierced by an enemy's blade. After the fall of their first ally, the group realized the situation was far more dire than they'd imagined. The blade that struck the boy hadn't come from the bullies, but from an independent figure who seemed to be acting on his own. This swordsman quickly dispatched another bully, driving his blade into their torso and swiftly downing a third. Despite this, the remaining bullies, furious at seeing their comrades defeated so easily, continued their attack. As expected, the mysterious swordsman swiftly cut down the last two bullies, all in the blink of an eye. Faced with this reality, the athletes fled in panic. Circling ahead, the swordsman intercepted their escape, proving that no one could leave without his permission. Turning back to Haruka, who was anxious about returning to Onwu, the last place he wanted to be, Muriel gave him a pleading look, asking if he really needed to be so dramatic about it. Haruka, exasperated, said it wasn't fair of her to make puppy dog eyes just to get her way, as it made it hard for him to refuse. Reluctantly, he arrived at the Lord of Onwu's mansion, a massive house that made him feel insignificant. He noticed a painting that seemed to show the Lord and his wife happily together, though Haruka wanted nothing more than to leave as soon as possible. As he edged toward the nearest exit, Muriel reappeared, annoyed that he hadn't waited for her to change as she requested. Haruka, pretending he was only waiting outside, had his intentions quickly seen through. Frustrated, Muriel made it clear that she'd see him rewarded one way or another, so he should stay put. Later, to show her sincerity, she dragged him to a feast laid out on the table. Haruka gave up on his plan to escape and enjoyed the meal. Afterward, Muriel had a maid bring a cash reward for his assistance. Moreover, she presented Haruka with an Onwu identity card, allowing him to come and go from the city freely. In return, she only asked that he remember the name of this town. But Haruka's mind was more focused on the texture of the pudding he was about to eat. Embarrassed, Muriel softly mentioned that she dressed up for him, only for him to act so carefree. On the 22nd, Haruka returned to the inn where his group was staying. He explained he hadn't tried to escape, but that the city lord had invited him to his mansion. Suspicious, the girls pressed him on why he'd been invited, but he played ignorant. Most of them eventually dropped the topic and set off on a mission, leaving Haruka hopeful that the others would also forget about it. However, the class representative insisted that he couldn't leave the city. Smiling slyly, Haruka assured them he understood, and once they left, he immediately prepared for another escape, using his invisibility cloak. This time, he had a trump card, the Onwu identity card given to him by the Lord's daughter. So he slipped through the city gates and decided to spend some of his reward money on supplies. He indulged in various foods, not mushrooms this time, and left a note for the class representative. In it, he mentioned he was heading to check on the athletes in the forest and asked the girls to keep training while he was gone. Arriving at the exit, Haruka encountered a burly guard, but his new ID secured his freedom from Onwu. This time, if he came across any carriage in distress, he'd ignore it and continue on his way. Eventually, he reached the forest, where familiar mushrooms grew in the underbrush, fish swam in the river, and monsters lurked as usual. Haruka felt at home again. However, he spotted an orc, a creature unusual for this part of the forest. Nevertheless, the items he bought in Onwu proved useful, and he defeated the creature with ease. As the sun began to set, he noticed something odd. He came across a bloodstain on a rock. Assuming it wasn't from the isekai-savvy nerds, he guessed it belonged to the athletes. Following a trail of footprints and blood, he soon found the athletes injured on a rock. He immediately tossed several mushroom-based healing potions to them. As they recovered, the leader, Kakizaki, recognized Haruka and asked if the girls were safe. Haruka assured him they were, thanks to the athletes. With that, Kakizaki felt a sense of pride, knowing he'd helped protect the class. Haruka finished by telling them they were truly the best athletes the class could have. As night falls, Haruka learns that all the bullies are dead and no one knows where the nerds have gone. The killer is an unknown figure who seems unstoppable, having stolen all the weapons the delinquents brought into this world. According to Kakizaki, the swordsman is a brilliant strategist who likely planned this entire scheme. The leader suspects this stranger is targeting the class representative as she possesses the abduction skill, a powerful ability that allows her to steal the abilities of enemies she kills, making it one of the most coveted skills imaginable. Haruka feels uneasy as only he and the nerds should have known about the representative's skill. However, the athletes had guessed her ability because the swordsman had persistently asked about her. Ultimately, the mysterious attacker spared the athletes, hoping they'd lead him to the class representative, his ultimate target. Yet the athletes decided to evade him by wandering through the forest, nearly meeting their end anyway. Now with the enemy surely on their trail, Kakizaki believes they can win by combining their forces with Haruka. Haruka, however, prefers to stay uninvolved. His only desire is to live peacefully alone in the forest. Still, Dubi calls and cannot ignore what's happening. He agrees to help but insists on fighting solo, urging the athletes to head back to the city and join the girls. After the group departs, he reflects that he would have preferred having them cover the rear, but if everyone perishes, there will be no one left to protect the girls. Meanwhile, the girls search for Haruka around Onmu, but despite the note he left, the class representative can't help but worry. Back in the forest, Haruka recalls the athlete's insight into the swordsman's weapon skill, which is powerful but leaves the user vulnerable once initiated, with no way to cancel it. To exploit this weakness, Haruka knows he must level up, so he begins defeating goblins along the way. Although it's not enough, he needs tougher enemies. Fortune favors him as he encounters the Goblin King, which could give him the experience boost he needs. Haruka carefully dodges the king's massive club and finds an opening to cast his signature magic, Magic Envelope, which combines multiple spells into one. This maneuver strikes a fatal blow. Unexpectedly, the Goblin Emperor appears, a level 50 creature, far beyond Haruka's level 9. Haruka knows he can't face this monster head-on, but he also realizes escape is not an option. He uses the same spell combination tactic, launching an attack that damages the Emperor but does not defeat it. The Emperor retaliates, striking Haruka's face, forcing him to dodge to avoid a deadly blow. Finding a brief opening, Haruka counters with his staff, reducing the Emperor's HP by half. However, the monster begins to heal itself and unleashes a powerful skill that sends Haruka crashing into trees. Barely holding on, Haruka remembers his friends are counting on him, which fuels his resolve. With renewed determination, he throws himself at the Emperor for one final, all-out attack. Hours later, with dawn breaking, Haruka stands victorious but exhausted, celebrating his new level 11 status. Returning to his cave, he examines his new skills, discovering that his magic envelope now has a perk that negates the usual delay, allowing him to attack instantly upon selecting it. Soon after, a figure approaches Haruka's dwelling, revealing himself as Tanaka, the boy who had supposedly been bullied, but had orchestrated a far more elaborate plan. In Onyu, the girls return after a day of hunting and find the athletes by the city wall. Kakizaki explains that Haruka remained behind to face an enemy in the forest. Meanwhile, back at Haruka's cave, he sarcastically welcomes Tanaka, who laments that he hasn't yet reached the class representative through the wounded athletes, despite all of his efforts to manipulate the bullies and use them as pawns. With this revelation, Haruka realizes that Tanaka was the mastermind all along. Tanaka confesses to using the delinquents to split up the class, infuriating Haruka, who demands to know the fate of the other members. With a chilling indifference, Tanaka reveals they're all dead and, eager to obtain the abduction skill, declares he has no time to waste on someone with worthless skills like Haruka. In response, Haruka raises his weapon, blocking Tanaka's path, ready to end their deadly confrontation right there. With remarkable skill, Tanaka lifted rocks from the ground, a cloud of dust rising as a display of his power. Smirking, he commented on the dreadful skills he had left behind in the White Room, asserting that Haruka, armed only with the weakest abilities, stood no chance against him. Unlike Haruka, whose style focused on singular techniques, Tanaka boasted a vast array of skills and wasn't hesitant to use them. He conjured rocks and hurled them at Haruka, while also using his interference ability, a vocal command that triggered strange reactions in his opponent's body. Meanwhile, the class representative discovered Haruka was battling alone in the forest and tried to rush to his aid. Kakizaki stopped her, insisting Haruka could handle it. Back at the fight, Haruka struggled to dodge Tanaka's relentless projectiles, his movements hindered by the interference ability. Tanaka acknowledged Haruka's impressive evasion but doubted he could continue dodging as he summoned even more magic. Despite the growing difficulty, Haruka persevered, barely escaping defeat. Tanaka taunted Haruka, calling him weak and expressing surprise that he managed to survive this long. Haruka sarcastically thanked him, and before delivering a decisive blow, Tanaka asked when Haruka first began to suspect him. Haruka admitted that it felt off from the beginning. A math genius hanging out with bullies was far from ordinary. Tanaka smirked, admitting Haruka wasn't as foolish as he thought. When Haruka questioned how long Tanaka had been planning this, the villain revealed that it started as soon as he noticed his newfound interference technique and the absence of a kidnapping skill. He realized he could manipulate the bullies and use them to achieve his goals. As Tanaka concluded his confession, he immobilized Haruka by binding his foot with roots and declared the fight over. With a dramatic blaze, he unleashed flames on Haruka, lamenting how disappointing the battle had been. However, as the fire engulfed the area, Haruka emerged unharmed, having absorbed the attack's power thanks to a vine he had unwittingly attached to a magic item. Its absorption effect had saved him, giving Haruka the chance to strike back. Seizing the moment, Haruka attacked with his cane, but Tanaka swiftly conjured a sword to block the blow. Mocking Haruka's attempt at a comeback, Tanaka assured him he didn't need magic to win. Bluffing while deciding which weapon to use, he ultimately chose all his arsenal, switching between them to confuse Haruka with a variety of attack patterns. The intense assault overwhelmed Haruka, and he was struck by a powerful blow that sent him flying. As Haruka struggled to his feet, Tanaka mocked him, questioning if he felt defeated yet. Analyzing the situation, Haruka realized Tanaka's constant weapon changes made it hard to find an opening. He asked if Tanaka used a mimic skill to copy others' abilities. Amused, Tanaka admitted Haruka's deduction was correct. Haruka accused him of seeking the class rep's kidnapping skill, but Tanaka revealed his goal was broader. He aimed to acquire any and all powers, striving for invincibility. He then unleashed a scythe attack, forcing Haruka further onto the defensive. Haruka realized the longer the fight dragged on, the more abilities Tanaka would display. Even when Haruka attempted to counter, Tanaka evaded his strikes with an illusion technique. Despair began to set in, and Haruka lowered his cane, seemingly accepting defeat. Seeing an opening, Tanaka charged, but Haruka used a psychic ability to anticipate and dodge the attack. He taunted Tanaka, revealing he had figured out that the mimic skill only allowed 3 uses of a copied power. Stunned, Tanaka lost his arrogance as he realized Haruka's observation was correct. Now aware of this limitation, Haruka continued dodging and countering with increasing precision. Tanaka, unable to rely on his skills repeatedly, began to falter. Haruka pressed the advantage, striking relentlessly until he sent Tanaka crashing against a tree. Seeing an opportunity to end the fight, Haruka rushed forward. However, Tanaka, refusing to admit defeat, conjured a fast and powerful fireball. Although the attack missed, its sheer force showed the fight was far from over. Tanaka forced Haruka to retreat with another impressive display of power. Despite his dominance, Tanaka's frustration boiled over as he struggled to accept losing ground to someone he considered a failure. His emotional outburst revealed a potential weakness, his inability to maintain composure in the face of adversity. Still, Tanaka wasn't finished. He unleashed his trump card, a stolen skill, unrivaled in power. Cloaked in ghostly purple energy, he zigzagged toward Haruka, striking from all angles with such speed and unpredictability that his opponent barely kept up. Suddenly, Tanaka appeared overhead, ready to deliver the final blow, but Haruka narrowly dodged, shaken by the sheer force that left the ground shattered from the impact. Wasting no time, Tanaka summoned spirits to envelop Haruka, draining his life force with a death skill. Haruka collapsed, seemingly defeated, as Tanaka laughed triumphantly. Stepping on Haruka's head, he declared the fight over, lamenting how many skills he wasted. Confident he could replenish his arsenal with the seizure skill, Tanaka bid a smug farewell and walked away. But his gloating was cut short when Haruka stood up and taunted him, questioning if he thought a simple kick would end things. Startled, Tanaka insisted the death skill was infallible, effective at level 11 and beyond. Haruka smirked, explaining that his well-being skill granted immunity to negative statuses, rendering such techniques useless. Additionally, he reminded Tanaka of his extraordinary luck, a stack he had maxed out, making hostile magic likely to fail. Haruka revealed that he had only pretended to be defeated and admitted that the head kick had been a tactical blunder on Tanaka's part. Confused, Tanaka questioned how Haruka could move despite the interference skill from earlier. Haruka revealed that his lesser-known mannequin ability allowed him to create fake bindings, tricking Tanaka into thinking he was immobilized. This revelation pushed Tanaka into a frenzy as he attacked wildly, but Haruka countered every move effortlessly. The once calm genius unraveled, his precise calculations proving useless. Desperate, Tanaka ranted that in his world, 1 + 1 always equals 2. Haruka agreed, but reminded him that this was a different world, one governed by its own rules. These words triggered memories of Tanaka's mundane school life, where his intellect far surpassed his peers. Bored and disdainful, he had yearned for something to break the monotony. The discovery of the skills board in this world had been his salvation. Driven by ambition, Tanaka resolved to craft a thrilling existence, even if it meant exploiting and discarding others. Yet his grand plans were now crumbling before someone he deemed insignificant. Fueled by rage, Tanaka lunged with his sword, only to be disarmed by Haruka. Believing his rival defenseless, Haruka moved to end the fight, but Tanaka's sword magically returns, striking Haruka's shoulder. Seizing the opportunity, Tanaka attacked relentlessly, chanting that 1 + 1 will always be 2. Haruka, despite his injuries, retaliated with a strike from his cane, pointing out that Tanaka's reliance on stolen skills had made him complacent. As Haruka's body glowed with a golden aura, Tanaka made one final charge, but Haruka unleashed an invented ability, ending the duel decisively. Defeated and kneeling, Tanaka listened as Haruka declared that even the weakest abilities had their uses. Haruka then walked away, leaving Tanaka to collapse in defeat. Exhausted and gravely injured, Haruka trudged through the forest, reflecting on his friends and apologizing to them in his mind. Just as he was about to collapse, the nerds arrived and caught him. They explained they had been searching for him after hearing he was fighting alone. Together, they carried him back to the safety of the camp. Upon returning to Omyun, Haruka became the center of attention. The girls fussed over his injuries, insisting on giving him a proper bath despite his protests. Meanwhile, the Big Jack girls apologized to the nerds for having once supported their expulsion and expressed gratitude for their efforts in saving the group. Haruka, uncomfortable with the attention, tried to sneak away, but the class rep stopped him, hugging him tightly and scolding him for worrying about her. When Haruka asked if he had made her cry again, she denied it, relieved that he was alive. Despite his victory, Haruka couldn't escape the scolding he received from every girl in the class. For now, though, it was a moment of peace, a small reprieve before whatever challenges awaited next. This then marks the end of today's anime recap. If you've enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach our current goal of 20,000 subscribers.